Since 1934, Iowa's farmers have turned to the Iowa Farm Bureau spokesman as their trusted news source. Now, the Spokesman Speaks. Listen in and hear from leading experts on topics important to farmers and agriculture. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to our November 14th edition of the Spokesman Speaks podcast. I'm Andrew Wheeler, and today's episode features two guests. First, we'll have Dr. Alejandro Plastina with us to cover where things currently stand with carbon credit markets and what farmers need to know. Then, we'll bring on Laura Cunningham, a farmer and County Farm Bureau leader who's helped spearhead a new ag program in northern Iowa's Central Springs School District. First up is Iowa State University Ag Economics professor Dr. Alejandro Plastina to offer his best insights into today's carbon credit opportunities. Spokesman editor Tom Block has the story.
Hi, Alejandro. You've been studying the opportunities regarding carbon credit programs for Iowa farmers. Why is there so much interest in agriculture carbon markets right now?
Well, at the global scale, there's increasing interest in sequestering carbon and achieving carbon neutrality. And the more corporations and governments are pledging to become carbon neutral over the next 10, 20, or 30 years. And agriculture has the potential to actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions and also sequester carbon and store that carbon in the soil. So that, along with venture capital flowing at large scale into these carbon programs and lots of interest in new legislation and regulation to foster carbon markets and carbon sequestration, are all creating synergies for agriculture to play a role in this market for carbon sequestration. Just to name a few pieces of legislation that are relevant for this space, we know the Inflation Reduction Act has recently been passed, and also the Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities. Both are injecting big amounts of money into fostering carbon sequestration in the US.
Yeah, and you mentioned the equity flowing into the markets is big right now, and the number of carbon programs offered continues to grow with that influx of private and public funding. How can farmers keep track and evaluate the different options that are out there?
Yeah, you're right. The number keeps growing by the minute. And I'm sure that most Midwest farmers have already been approached by representatives from these carbon programs or heard about the big menu of options out there through general media or through extension reports and presentations. ISU has produced several reports on these carbon programs for agricultural practices, and people can access those reports by going into the Ag Decision Maker website linked to Iowa State, and we also have videos associated with those reports, and we will also be going out and doing several presentations associated with the ICM conference, ProAg, and other extension series throughout the state of Iowa over the next 2 months.
What kind of farming practices have the potential to receive carbon credit payments? And will these programs adequately compensate early adopters of these practices?
So the list of practices really vary by program, but in general, I would say that moving from conventional tillage to reduce or no tillage, planting cover crops, reducing stocking rates on pastures, reducing fertilizer rates, converting marginal cropland to grassland, planting trees, those are typical practices that would help generate carbon credits. And for those early adopters, it really depends on which program they are considering. So some programs have a look back period where those early adopters get recognized some of their carbon sequestration over the past 2 or 3 years, depending on the program, but not all carbon programs offer that possibility. And in that sense, early adopters are not really generally accepted into this new programs because of the additionality requirement, right? Additionality and permanence are two of the characteristics that these carbon programs are asking for carbon credits in agriculture. And additionality means that only land going into these practices for the first time are considered additional. The reasoning behind this requirement is that in order for the carbon credit to count towards offsetting a carbon emission by, let's say, a private company, then the private company would have to pay for additional or for new changes in practices, not for old changes in practices or business as usual. So that's the additionality concept. That's really putting, some pushback on early adopters.
Exactly. That's one of the concerns we've heard. And we've seen surveys that show farmers are very aware of these programs, but they also show that farmers are concerned that the prices currently being offered for carbon credits don't offset the actual cost of adopting and maintaining the practices required. Are there any signals that the price for these credits may increase over time?
Well, as you notice, there's a high demand for these carbon credits, but prices are not there yet in terms of being able to cover all costs. So, adoption or participation in these carbon programs is kind of limited so far. It really depends on who you speak with. You get the feeling that carbon prices will take off pretty soon to much higher levels. If you speak with people from other sectors, you might be convinced otherwise. And the reason I say that is that agriculture is not acting in a vacuum, right? There are many sources, potential sources for carbon credits. Think renewable energy, think forestry, and industrial carbon sequestration. So agriculture is not just producing carbon credits by itself, is competing with other sectors and industries in the production of these carbon credits. Forestry has a long history of producing carbon credits, and they have a very well oiled system, a mechanism to generate these credits. Renewable energy is the same, and agriculture is just starting to generate verified carbon credits. So I think it will take some time, in my opinion, for the prices to go up for agricultural carbon credits. The demand is there. I think it will continue to be there, but it has to do with the credibility of carbon credits from agriculture from the standpoint of those buyers, of the corporations, of the governments buying the credits. And I think they are learning what entails to buy these agricultural carbon credits right now.
Information sharing is also likely to be a big part of any carbon credit market. Do you think participation in these markets could burden farmers with a lot of additional record keeping to verify the practices or could cause any privacy concerns?
Well, it is my understanding that most carbon programs are going out of their way to keep the information exchange as simple as possible, to keep track of the processes implemented and the changes in practices with as little effort from the part of the farmer as possible. So they are willing to take data already produced by georeferencing systems in the tractors and other data that is already available. So I don't think the burden will be tremendously high, let's say. But anytime that there is an exchange of data that is geo-referenced, it can be a source of concern. When I speak with the representatives from different carbon programs, they all assure me that there's a solid, system to take good care of the data and that everything is secure. All the transactions are secure, but that's something that we don't really know how secure it is until that security is challenged.
Yeah, it's definitely a new frontier, exploring a lot of new areas here.
Yes.
You mentioned the concepts earlier. Additionality was one that you explained pretty well, but the other one was of permanence. And what happens if land ownership changes hands on a field that's been enrolled in a carbon program?
So that's a great question. There are two takes on that question. One is the permanence of a carbon credit. So the longer a greenhouse gas is sequestered and stored in the soil, that makes the carbon sequestration more permanent, and buyers would typically be willing to pay higher prices for more permanent carbon sequestration, right? But that's one aspect of permanence. The other aspect of permanence or durability is the contractual aspect of durability between the operator, the farmer, and the carbon program. And in that sense, what I'm told when I ask these questions to representatives from these carbon programs is that the contract is only attached to the operator, the farm operator. So if a farmer is renting land, the farmer should get approval to participate in this contract from the landowner. But if the land changes hands while the contract is active and the new owner does not want to participate or does not allow the farmer to continue participating in this contract, then the contract for the carbon program will be terminated. And the only penalty for the farmer, the participating farmer, is that carbon credits will no longer accumulate after the termination of the program. But that's what I'm being told. So, and that, of course, results in maybe some payments that are not actually as large as expected based on a lower amount of carbon sequestered by an early termination. But other than that, I'm being told again that there's no additional penalty on the farmer.
Okay, that's good to hear. Are there other factors that farmers should be aware of as they consider opportunities for carbon credits?
Oh, most certainly. There are lots of questions to ask, and the specific question that we addressed before is one of the important ones, right? What's really the penalty for an early termination due to a change in hands of the land if it is being rented? But also, what's the out of pocket costs that a farmer can expect in terms of verification processes, or what's the expected burden in terms of letting people come into the farm to take soil samples, how frequently, over what area, and so on. So, what are the costs to the farmer? Then, what are the models or what are the methodologies that the carbon program, yes, will be using to measure carbon credits? And there are two moments in which that methodology is very important. One is at the onset, before signing the contract, the carbon program will typically produce a projection for the farmer, telling him or her, well, this is what you would expect to generate in terms of carbon sequestration over the length of our contract. But then the farmer is paid not on the projection but on the actual sequestration, and those numbers can differ. So knowing beforehand how the carbon program will project the amount of carbon to be sequestered, and then how the carbon will verify the amount on which the carbon will be paid. And having that very clear from the beginning, I think, is critical. There are, of course, concerns about the contract length and the timing of payments that should be clear from the onset, as well as the way that discontinuation of practices will generate penalties, or if there's any exit clause that the farmer should be aware of. Another, a very important aspect is with all this public support for conservation practices, mostly through NRCS, whether the carbon program would allow the stacking of payments, from cost share programs with any revenue generated from carbon credits. So I think those are the major questions that I would suggest people ask before signing a contract.
Very good advice. For as many programs that are out there, I think they all operate just a little bit differently, so it pays to do your homework.
That's exactly right. Yeah, people need to do their homework. Definitely. Yes.
read those contracts. You mentioned that you've done some publications and some work on that. Where can people find that, and anything else you have in store coming up on these programs?
Yeah, so we do have a number of publications. People can go to extension.iastate.edu/agdm/ and search their carbon programs, and that will produce a list of publications and videos related to this topic. And right now we are updating the description of the carbon program because some are no longer available from the last time we published this report, and we have new programs that came in line since then. So we are expanding this publication, and also we will produce a decision tool where people can use the results from a geophysical model to actually estimate by county what's the expected amount of carbon sequestration, and they can enter their expected prices, their costs. So this decision tool will let them know the expected net returns to implementing changes of practices to generate carbon credits. So again, we will be developing a decision tool so people can go online, check what's the expected amount of carbon sequestration that they can generate through different carbon practices, input their expected prices, their expected costs, and this program will inform them about the expected net return by county and practice. Hopefully that's of value, and that's coming online over the next month or so.
That's great. That's definitely something we'll keep our eyes out for. We thank you for joining us. We're just scratching the surface of these carbon markets, and so we'll continue to keep in touch for more information.
Looking forward to that. Thank you very much.
When you're covering an evolving topic like carbon credits, there's plenty of ground to cover, and we appreciate Dr. Plastina coming on to give us a quick update. If you'd like to learn more, Dr. Plastina referenced the resources available on ISU's Ag Decision Maker website. And again, the web address for that site is extension.iastate.edu/agdm. We've also linked that site down in the notes for this episode, so you can click down there after you're done listening here. Up next is Laura Cunningham, a Northern Iowa farmer and County Farm Bureau leader who has helped her local school district start an ag education program and an FFA chapter, which hadn't existed in her school district since the 1960s. Here's spokesman reporter Bob Beyond to bring us that story.
This year, Central Springs High School in Manly began offering agriculture classes and welcomed its first FFA chapter. Laura Cunningham is a co-founder of the Central Springs Ag Ed Boosters, a not-for-profit set up to finance the launch of the new program. Let's start with, maybe you can tell us a little bit about Central Springs Community School District. I understand it includes students from 4 different counties in north central Iowa.
Yeah, so the Central Springs District is a merged district, and we have 2 campuses. There's an elementary and a middle school in the North Springs community, and then also an elementary and the high school resides in Manly. And so the district itself spans Cerro Gordo, Floyd, Mitchell, and Worth counties, and those are all kind of northern 2 tiers of counties in the state. So although we're a small school, our landmass covered by the district is one of the biggest in this whole state.
So when did discussions of an ag program at Central Springs begin? And how soon afterward was the Ag Ed Boosters formed?
It's kind of a saga, but one with a good ending, so it's fun to tell the story. Back in 2019, we were fortunate to host a young lady from Forest City, which is a neighboring school district to ours. She was practicing speaking for her bid for the state FFA office. And so when word got out that the school board would be hosting a presentation, community leaders just called around and completely packed that boardroom, because it had always been kind of a sentiment in the community that we wanted this program, we just couldn't gain any traction. And so everybody turned out for that meeting. It was such a big meeting, actually, that we had to move it to a bigger location, which that's kind of awesome. When you have a school event that's so popular, you have to find a bigger bigger location. But we really kind of faced some headwinds early on. There were questions about, does the community need a program like this? Is there demand from the students? Even some questions of relevancy. And, we're in agriculture, so that seems a no-brainer for us. But there were questions of if it's even relevant to teach agriculture in this day and age in a school district. So we really needed a place to channel volunteer energy, organize our efforts, form some good talking points, and help our administration learn about what's available in the program and how needed this is in a small community like ours. That's when we formed the 501c3 Central Springs Ag Ed Boosters, and we were really quickly joined by that group of people that turned out for the meeting. There were 30 other volunteers ready to do any sort of volunteering that they could to help bring this to fruition. And then COVID happened, so that kind of slowed us down a little bit, but we really had to respect all that our school district had to tackle in that time frame in just helping the students get through that and stay on track with their learning. So kind of tapped the brakes for a while. But then in 2021, the students actually revitalized it. They started reaching out to school board members, asking about revisiting the idea. And they did some primary research even. They started polling their peers in the school, asking them if they'd be interested in it and what topics they might be interested. It took about 7 school board meetings, but then after a workshop session, we kind of came to an agreement and we're presented a plan. If we fundraised $400,000 to sustain it through the first 5 years of building the program, the school would take it on in year 6. So then it seemed like it was in fast forward. In April, we were given the green light to start fundraising. And if we could get the first 100,000 before the start of the next school year, they would start it as early as this fall. And we made that mark. So a couple more school board meetings, and here we are with a fully running ag curriculum in the high school and an FFA program that's off the ground as well.
It sounds like it's been a lengthy process to get these programs up and running and a lot of work on your end. Why is it so important to you and the others working closely with you on this project to establish an ag program for Central Springs?
The bulk of Central Springs Ag Ed Booster volunteers are really made up of 2 groups. There's business owners and parents of middle school students, actually. And both of those groups really have an interest in what kind of things can we do today in our small community that'll create a great tomorrow. We all have families that are growing. We'd love to have a place for them to come back after they do some higher education, if that's in the cards. In Worth County alone, where our high school sits, 1 in 3 people are employed in ag-related fields. So if we want to look to the future of what our communities are going to be like, help those businesses and invite families back to North Iowa to live, work, and play someday, a great place to start is with hands-on experience and getting exposed to the industry that's really the backbone of our local community. So one of my colleagues actually in Boosters, Jessica Lutz, said it best, and she described kind of how many of the professional skills, thinking back, she really gleaned as a past Ag Ed and FFA student. It's something she wants for her children in the future. I'm the same. My son's 2. I'd love for him to have a program like this to dig into and develop his leadership skills. And it's really about preparing them for future careers, whether that's on or off the farm, because today's Ag Ed and FFA isn't just for farm kids. It's really for anyone wanting to develop professional skills and dig into some career opportunities.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the coursework involved in a high school ag education program. What sort of topics are students being exposed to and learning about?
Well, Ag Ed and FFA is really kind of unique in the way that it encourages students to take what they learn in the classroom and then apply it in either a supervised ag experience project, or maybe it's leadership and career development events in the FFA chapter. Our strand of Ag Ed in particular, because there's a lot of different directions you can take a program, but ours is going to cover ag and food and natural resources, animal science and plant science, and then next year we'll also add ag power and technology and ag business as well. And so the instructor that we have also teaches a foods course at the high school. So he's doing some really unique things as far as crossover work, kind of helping students from both of those strands of curriculum learn about farm to table and food science and some of those ways that agriculture really crosses over with culinary type careers and the food service industry and that other extension that we know as agriculture but isn't always thought of that way. And then all the ag ed students have a supervised ag experience. That's part of the curriculum requirement. So they select a project area that they're passionate about. And it could be production agriculture, it could be ag business placement, it could be volunteerism, or even a research project. And they really put those classroom learnings to work in a hands-on way. Those kids that are in FFA will have even more opportunities to apply those skills when they go to leadership conferences, and they can compete against other students around the state in career development events, for instance, job interview or extemporaneous speaking or floriculture, egg mechanics, all kinds of opportunities for them.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about FFA. In addition to welcoming the new classes, Central Springs also launched its first ever FFA chapter. Before this year, how did Central Springs students participate in FFA?
Yes. So FFA history has been some of the most fun conversation to have with community members. So there's really a lot of alumni influence in the area. FFA alumni members from really long-running chapters. Rockford FFA is represented, Osage, St. Ansgar, Northwood, and even more, which is kind of surprising since Central Springs as a merged district hasn't had an in-house program since 1964. I think that's also a testament, though, to the power of this type of a program in really retaining students and families in the area. And there's even been some instances in the past where the district has shared instructors for a short stint, but it's really kind of difficult for students to feel the full benefit of investing work into a chapter, and especially into an SAE, without that continuity of having an in-house chapter.
So what experiences and learning opportunities do Central Springs students now have through FFA that they were missing before this year?
So where this program really shines is in the application of classroom skills. And we talked about that just a little bit, but they could do a brief unit in a genetics in a science class, for instance, but in an ag class, they could do an animal or plant science lab activity, learning how genetics from two crosses can create maybe a new type of vegetable or a healthier meat product, and then go on to start an SAE project on raising microgreens, for instance, for sale at the farmer's market. And then maybe they want to enter their project in a state proficiency competition and pit their work against students from all over the state. And maybe that leads them to earn their way onto the big stage for recognition for that work. So those are just a few examples of how this type of a program absolutely takes learning to the next level, and in a way that really can't be replicated in a traditional science classroom, for instance.
So now that we're well into the school year, what has enrollment been like for these programs? Are you seeing buy-in from the students and community?
I was hoping you'd ask this because the response has been incredible. In year one, for example, in the program, we have 45 kids in ag classes in FFA. And for our small school, that's 1/6 of the entire high school population. So that's amazing in itself. In the first 2 months as a chapter, then those kids have really dug in. They've participated in 2 community service projects. They've attended a leadership conference on a regional level and met some other students from other schools. They've done soils competition, and they're even gearing up for their first trip to Indianapolis for National FFA Convention. And when I think back to my own experience, I went to the National FFA Convention as a freshman, and total game changer. You just don't realize how big and broad-reaching the FFA organization is until you see that sea of Blue Jackets at convention. So I can't wait to hear how their experience is and all they learned and who they met while they were there. You can tell I'm excited about it, but the students, their excitement is so contagious, and I just can't wait to watch them live out this experience and all the great things they put into their program of activities for the first year. And that doesn't even include the community yet. So my gosh, do we have small town love in North Iowa. They've shown up big, from monetary support towards our end goal, volunteering, both time and monetary resources for the classroom. And I can't tell you the amount of times that I'm stopped at a gas station or at the elevator where someone says, "We've needed this program for so long. Thank you to all the people that are putting in time and work to make this happen. I can't wait till my granddaughter gets to experience it, or my grandson gets to go on this trip." I hear that all the time, and it really doesn't seem like work when it's that fun and there's that many people excited about it. So everybody's shown up big.
We talked a little bit about the funding part of this. Securing funding to support the first 5 years of these programs was part of the deal struck with Central Springs prior to launching. Where are you at with those funding goals?
So I'm happy to report that from April, when we got that green light to start fundraising, to now October, we're at 85% of that total goal raised. We've had incredible support from businesses and individual donors. We also have a Give Grain campaign that one of the committees on our boosters team has worked on. They visited local elevators and got them set up to accept grain donations. So even that's underway. So we're slowly inching towards that goal every day, but it's still exciting to already be at 85% in such a short time.
And remind us of what the goals were.
It's $400,000 over 5 years to build the program, and then the school takes it over. So our total fundraising goal is $400,000.
County Farm Bureaus have really stepped up to support Central Springs as well. Tell us a little about their involvement.
Yes, Floyd County, Cerro Gordo, and Worth County Farm Bureaus were 3 of our very first sponsors. And when we were thinking about a strategy on how to tackle, $400,000 can seem daunting, but if you break it down into small pieces, it's not so bad. And they were some of the first folks that we wanted to talk to about this program. Because when we think about people, progress, and pride, an ag ed program absolutely fits the bill for that. And they all responded exactly how we needed in the beginning of a program, committing $55,000 together with the 3 of them for the program. So that really was the anchor we needed to get started. They were the leadership that when we talked to other businesses and other folks about it, and we were able to say, we've got farm bureaus on board. They're all in on this program. We're like, okay, yeah, I can follow suit. If they're on board, it's got to be a good thing. Worth County member Joe Rao actually serves on our school board. So having some farm bureau members and advocates in the school system was really great, because the other thing about this is when you haven't had it since 1964, there's some education that goes with it, helping people understand what's available in the program. And having somebody on the school board that had experience as an alumni to talk about the program was so important to getting us to this point. Jessica Lutz and Jordan Davison from Cerro Gordo County Farm Bureau sat through a ton of school board meetings. I think there were 11 altogether that we needed to sit through, and having them there to share their perspective. Both Jessica was an alumni, but Jordan wasn't. So seeing both sides of that perspective and how they wanted this for their kids in the community was a big influence as well. So when I think back to volunteers that came early and often to strategy meetings and volunteered at events, a lot of them were Farm Bureau members and leaders. And so it's really an incredible network that we have in every county in Iowa, and it made a huge difference in landing this program at Central Springs.
And lastly, how can listeners further support ag education at Central Springs?
Thanks for asking, Bob. So listeners can find us online at csagedboosters.com. We've got a website created for our 501(c), but it's largely focused on updates for this program right now. We're also on Facebook, so Central Springs Ag Ed Boosters, both of those places have the latest on how a person can volunteer or donate. We love to share what the students are up to. We're lucky to have this program underway already, and so sharing updates on what they're digging into in year 1 is fun. It's also a place where we recognize our sponsors, so taking a look at who's already contributed and supported the program. Also, if listeners want to donate grain, I mentioned that program early on, our Give Grain campaign. Our volunteers have gone to all of the local elevator retailers that are in the district and set up an account for Central Springs Ag Ed Booster. So if a farmer is harvesting and wants an easy way to contribute to the program, they can pull on the scale at their elevator and ask them to donate X bushels to Central Springs Ag Ed Boosters, and their retailer can help them. And since we're a 501(c)(3), all of those donations can be tax deductible.
Laura, thank you very much for taking time to talk with us today.
Thanks, Bob. It's so fun to share the success, share the excitement from our community, and I can't wait to talk about this in 5 years when the program is quadrupled in size and we've got students on the big stage getting recognition for hard work and community members that recognize them from the great service projects that are in store as well.
You've really got to hand it to Laura and her fellow Ag Ed boosters for their passion and perseverance over the past few years. And it's great to see all of that work by parents, business owners, County Farm Bureau leaders, teachers, administrators, and students pay off with a new ag program and FFA chapter for Central Springs. It's a terrific example of the passion and collaboration that get things done in rural Iowa. And we're proud of the role that county farm bureaus and leaders like Laura have played in making that happen. If you'd like to show your support for the new Central Springs Ag and FFA programs, the website for that is csagedboosters.com, and we'll link that one down in the notes for this episode too. That's all for this episode of the Spokesman Speaks podcast. We hope you've gained a little inspiration and that you'll join us for our next episode on November 28th. Thank you for doing the work that inspires everything we do here at the Iowa Farm Bureau, and thanks for listening to the Spokesman Speaks.
Thank you for listening to the Spokesman Speaks, a podcast by Iowa Farm Bureau. Check out more podcast episodes at iowafarmbureau.com/podcast. You can also find and subscribe to the Spokesman Speaks podcast in the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and other popular podcast apps. We appreciate your ratings and reviews, and we welcome you to email us your feedback at podcast@ifbf.org.